Vladimir Putin described himself as leaning to conservatism, a liberal, a communist sympathizer, a nationalist, and then there was a moment when he proclaimed himself a part of like 10 ethnic groups living in Russia, although figuratively. It's not like he changed views, some of those claims were just months apart. But it feels as if he has a 12 polar disorder, but that's not it. I analyzed several movies and games sponsored by the Russian state, and after connecting them with Putin's actions and peculiarities of the Russian culture, my conclusion is that Putin doesn't want you to believe in certain ideologies or values. He doesn't even want you to obey him specifically. That's only a secondary concern. His main wish is for you to believe in any government currently in power, be it a Tsar or even an African warlord. Any current thing is worth supporting simply by being the current thing. Of course, by believing in this, you would also come to support Putin, who is the current Russian current thing, but why support literally everyone in power? Let me explain. But first of all, why movies and games? Partly because I enjoy them, partly because they are a very popular force of media nowadays, and the media is both a subtler and more efficient tool of propaganda than, let's say, official rhetoric. When you watch a movie, most likely you also relax and get invested into the story, which makes it easier to agree with something on the screen if it's not too different from your beliefs. While saying you're liberal and conservative at the same time doesn't cost anything, financing a film is quite an investment, so a state committee tasked with choosing the winning proposals is far more selective. 2014's Leviathan was probably the last big movie that was both critical of and sponsored by the Russian government. Ever since, the censorship became a priority, and all non-compliant movies went into indie. While the 2000s and early 2010s Russian cinema tried to mimic Western movies with 90s blockbuster vibes, like free sexual life and down-to-earth personal motives like love and vendetta, the late 2010s and especially 2020 saw a rise of government-backed historic and heroic titles glorifying the nation. That was also the time the state mentioned that the game industry kind of exists, and started molding it in a more patriotic way. Most of the state-sponsored media focuses on hating foreign enemies like the Westerners and of course Ukrainians. But right now I won't focus on it, but all the pieces that tell us more about Russian internal politics. The Union of Salvation tells a story about the 1825 revolt orchestrated by the splinter cells of the secret society called, well, the Union of Salvation. While it has some questionable artistic decisions like introducing characters with their backs turned to the camera or trying to tell half of the story with text as if it were some small, lazy YouTuber, its main problem is a complete revision of history, which is kind of strange for a historical movie. In real life, the secret societies, such as the Union of Salvation, were formed after the Napoleonic Wars under the impression that the French Revolution left on young Russian nobles. They aimed at creating a constitution that would restrain the Tsar, abolish serfdom, institute local governments, and do other based things. The Emperor Alexander I wanted nothing like that. He was liberal when young, but then quickly became conservative. Some say that power corrupted him, some that the Napoleonic Wars scared him of liberal ideas, but either way, by the 1820s he was already opposed to reforms. In real life. In the movie, it's different.
Конституцию, парламент избираемый, волю хлебопашцам.
Ну так давайте сделаем. You see, in the movie he wants reforms too, but some unknown, insurmountable force prevents the absolute monarch from implementing them. The movie never explains why he couldn't do it, and the conflict just doesn't work. The rebels want reforms, the government wants reforms, but they clash for some reason in the end. And the moral of the story is revealed in a half-assed confessions that rebels make to the new Tsar Nicholas I. This is true, by the way. He did speak with the rebel leaders after they surrendered. They basically boil down to, we just wanted to talk and you are the same as us. If you didn't understand a thing about how the events in the movie are connected, don't worry about it. No one did. That's why the people behind the film were forced to come out and say it explicitly. The meaning of the last few scenes is that revolutions are bad and you should just talk it out with your government. You know, because the Russian government is known for being accountable to Russian citizens, I guess. Let's be honest, revolutions aren't always good. The French Revolution popularized liberalism, but the French themselves switched to democracy only after a century of authoritarian fallbacks, and most other continental nations even later. Was it really worth millions of lives that the revolution and Napoleonic Wars brought? Compare it to Britain, which achieved the same, if not the better results, with evolution rather than revolution. The tragedy of the October Revolution is so vast that I made an entire series about it, arguing that it was the biggest disaster in the history of Russia and nations bordering it. Minus, of course, World War II. As controversial as revolutions can be, even less honest is to present the Russian government as listening to feedback. In fact, the inability to read the room before it explodes is the core trait of the Russian political system. Otherwise, they wouldn't have had two large-scale revolutions in a single century. Overall, this movie is only good for average realism fans like me who would enjoy accurate uniforms and depictions of Napoleonic warfare for purely aesthetic reasons. From the standpoint of political history, even fictional niche 1980s anime would have more merit. While Russians don't have state-sponsored anime, they have games. Opening the game section is Sparta 2035. Developed with a mind-blowing subsidy of $1 million to prevent the devs from starving, I guess, this game takes you to East Africa to fight with your Zoomer version of Wagner PMC led by a pink-haired girl against the terrorists whose terroristness isn't shown in the game. Only intro has some words and a single Sayori to show for it. To save the regime of the most stereotypical African warlord ever just because, you guessed it, because he happens to be the current thing. He even lives in a mansion he inherited from the predecessor, but he's the good guy, because his face on this masterfully crafted literally 1984 poster. I won't discuss the gameplay here as it carries no narrative, but the plot is just subpar. People often call XCOM too cartoonishly epic and bland in terms of story, but you at least have a worthy cause to fight for, and the dangers the aliens pose to humanity is shown in the game. Here you just fight with the guys in red bandanas to reinstate a guy who doesn't even pay you. But it's not like we didn't know that Russian PMCs aren't really profit driven, so it's okay, I guess. The devs did put a few hints that suggest they aren't too fond of the warlord, but since the game must have at least somewhat pro-Russian plot, they tried to make it as bland and meaningless as possible. There is a game that spends more time presenting you the current thing ideology though. Smuta, a game about the time of troubles when the Russian Tsardom faced both a power vacuum and a Polish invasion, is a flagship of the Russian subsidized game industry, with about $11 million subsidy received. A classic patriotic game with our guys absolutely noble and good, but the bad guys cartoonishly evil. This kind of double standard is common in many games, so I want to discuss what Smuta tries to teach Russian gamers instead. It's only in Russian, and sold only on Russian Steam parody called VK Play, and several government officials called it an educational game. So the message here should be clear and powerful, right? Not really. Most of the game is filled with side quests like go there, bring me this, unalive people in this village and the like. There are a few propaganda moments like the main character mocking early 17th century Europeans for being gay, and the head of the militia urging the people to donate everything they have, including their wives and children? Weird flex, but okay. But the main point of the MC's internal conflict seems to be this. Closer to the endgame, he experiences a bad trip and meets his pro-Polish future alter ego. The future MC mocks him, saying that while the present MC is a slave to the Tsar and confined to a small Orthodox corner of the world, he is a Polish noble having actual guaranteed rights, and if he continues to serve, his children will have the right to elect Polish kings, and he can travel over all of Europe because of being Catholic. To this flow of cringe and unbased improvements, the MC has only one counterpoint. Yeah, they didn't bother to name a single reason why Russia is worth saving. He escapes the bad trip and sometime later recaptures Moscow in an epic battle with 10 men or so. Russia is saved, the Poles retreat, happy end achieved. They also made a sequel called Zemsky Sobor, which is just a DLC marketed as a separate game and just adds a bunch of side quests and a truly innovative, for the 1980s maybe, mechanic of QTE, just peak gaming. Smuta teaches the player to like his country blindly. The desire to support foreign ideas, even if they are better, is presented as selfish, while sticking to your roots, no matter how flawed they are, is based. Nobody can answer why. It seems the government is assured that this twisted view of independence has a value so obvious that you don't need to justify it. And loving your homeland unquestionably also means being loyal to the government of that homeland, which brings us to what seems to be the core of Putin's worldview. Obeying the government, no matter how unresponsive, how illegitimate, or how incompetent, and a staunch opposition to anything foreign, a messages that the Russian media send. Based on that, I would argue that the only thing Putin truly believes in is power. Not power as a tool to achieve a better future for the people, the greatness of a particular nation, or any other goal. No, the power is the end goal itself. Be it a Tsar or a generic African warlord, Putin sympathizes with them simply because they have power. Why does power matter so much for Putin? I doubt it's just because he wants to exercise his authority, gain wealth and respect, and all those personal benefits. It's only a part of it. I would say say, and many journalists and biographers who dealt with Putin can confirm that the president of Russia is a man shaped by the post-imperial trauma, and his main fears are those of betrayal and subsequent anarchy. Betrayal because the USSR wasn't defeated in a fair fight, but fell seemingly on its own. Anarchy because without the Union, Russia and most of its neighbors plunged into regional wars and economic recessions. You can argue that the USSR itself dug its grave and that the foundation of this conflict was in the strange borders the USSR established. But how would that convince a Secret Service officer who believed in the Union's strength and seldom encountered its shortcomings during his stay in a relatively wealthy East Germany? That's why for him, power equals order, and if having as much power as possible ensures order over anarchy, it's a good thing to have. Even during his liberal years, he continued to centralize power and nationalize the media. The liberalism was only economic. When he says he likes communist ideas, it's because a large part of the Russian population still does, and he wants their support. When he says he's a nationalist and then proceeds to give ethnic Russians only symbolic priority in the constitution, thus effectively executing a civic and not ethnic nationalism, it's not because he believes that the civic values define Russian identity, but because his nation includes people of different religions and cultures, and he wants to preserve peace between them. Putin's ideology is two-layered. The core obsession with power is covered by a facade of different ideologies he employed to present himself to different groups of Russians. The facade can change depending on circumstances, but the core remains. The power obsession is also cultural. In most Western societies, power is considered an attribute that many actors can have. In Russia, power is the exclusive trait of the state. The word власть in Russian means both power and government. But what's interesting is that technically the more correct translation for government is правительство, yet this word can be seen only in official statements and professional speech. If an ordinary Russian is angry at the government, he won't say «Что же это правительство вытворяет?», but «Что же эта власть вытворяет?». In most Western countries, the term nation means both the government and the people, but for most Russians, the government and the people are completely separate entities. While you can see many Americans apologizing for Trump's tantrums, even if they didn't vote for him, an average Russian would never think he has anything to do with Putin's action in Ukraine, because he doesn't have power over even his personal life sometimes, let alone the government. This creates a system where a person is seen as an object and not as a citizen. While social programs or rights and freedoms in the West are products of political struggle, in Russia they are often temporary gifts that the state can revoke at any time. Just ask how many Russians consider their digital services to be the best in the world. Yet now, what's the point of your shiny 1 gigabit per second unlimited plan for only about 10 USD per month if the only thing you can access through it is government websites or local ripoffs of global social media apps, filled with often Epstein-grade content? Yeah, so much for being traditional and based. The pinnacle of this cynical attitude was this. Putin met the mothers of soldiers who died in Ukraine and told them that their sacrifice was noble, because it's better to die in a war than, say, from too much alcohol. In a nation where dying from cardiovascular disease is more common than in most of the world, this sounds like an outright mockery. Imagine if an American president praised the deceased US servicemen by saying that they chose a better way to die than from heart disease or cancer. To add salt to injury, out of all the women invited, only 2 were really mothers of the mobilized soldiers, with the rest being regular female workers of the government summoned to show more numbers. Putin was born and raised in a nation where power means everything and isn't shared with anyone but the close circle, where people are treated more like a resource than as citizens, and where any attempt at decentralizing coincided with the destruction of the state and subsequent chaos. He was trained as a Secret Service officer for whom paranoia is a professional trait, and the world came crashing down on him just as he was entering his 40s, an age people often consider the height of their life, where they are still physically capable, yet also comfortably richer than when they were younger. Do you know who else had such a severe expectation and reality mismatch that it made him a genocidal dictator? Okay, no logical fallacies this time, but the point still stands. Under such circumstances, it's not surprising that Putin believes in power only. For the longest time, he switched from one ideology to another just to capture the zeitgeist and stay on top, and his media did the same. The only core message that was always present both in his rhetoric and narratives of Russian state culture is simple: just obey the current thing. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and thanks for watching.